That was President Cyril Ramaphosa with his State of the Nation address, and perhaps not surprisingly that a lot of focus was put on the economy, as it's one of those things that affects all of us by and large. And we'll continue to unpack the issues of the State of the Nation address. Another aspect Palisa has now for us.
Yes, indeed, Peter. So we focus now on issues around education as they appeared on the President's speech last night. And you'd recall that earlier this week, Amnesty International South Africa released a report titled Broken and Unequal. The report looked into the state of education in South Africa and also access to quality education for children in South Africa's school system, with a particular focus there on the provinces of Gauteng, the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. So let's now welcome in our studio Samson Ogunyemi. He is economic, social, cultural rights researcher and campaigner from Amnesty International South Africa. He joins us now live. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good afternoon, Palisa, and good afternoon to your viewers.
All right, so you're not impressed with what came out of the President's speech when it comes to education last night, but what specifically are you not happy with?
I think let's put this in perspective. In 2018, the President announced this sanitation appropriate for education, which is a safe initiative. And in that there was commitment by the state to eradicate pit latrines. In 2019, in the SONA, the President again spoke quite extensively about the deaths of two youngsters, Michael Komape and Lumka Nketwa. Owing from that, we would have expected that there would be a progress report from the President, first showing how the state is intentionally trying to eradicate pit latrines, a progress report showing how the state is trying to make education equal in South Africa, a progress report showing how the state will, in the next 2 years, ensure that no school has pit latrines. And to put this in perspective again, there are over 23,471 schools in South Africa. Of these 23,471 schools, you have 3,898 schools still have only pit latrines. About 37 of these schools have no sanitation at all. 86% of schools have no laboratories. 77% of these schools have no libraries. 72% of these schools have no internet facility. These are quite shocking statistics, if you ask me. And what we would have expected is that there will be an intentional positioning for the state to ensure that, one, the inequality gap is bridged through education, but two, that the access and the right to quality education in South Africa is a reality for many
But
learners.
one can also argue to say that we should perhaps wait for the Basic Education Minister, Angie Motshekga, when she delivers her budget vote speech, perhaps later?
But that's quite correct, and I think there's good logic to say we should wait for the minister to deliver the speech. However, if the President had, in 2019, mentioned so much as eradicating pit latrines, and through the SAFE initiative, I think it was only appropriate that the country gets a progress report. And
but do we know how far the process is? Do we have any progress report maybe that speaks to the issue?
The progress report will depend on, so far, it's from the Department of Basic Education, and for that, there's a lot of loopholes in such data and statistics. We would expect that there's an up-to-date information from the department, but also from the President. I think it is a serious matter. There was litigation against this, won by civil society partners, Section 27. And if that's the case, we want to see that, to an extent, no kid in South Africa dies in a pit latrine. Schools should be safe, and the right to quality education should be a fulfillment for many.
So from the little information that you have at your disposal, do you think that the deadline, which is February 2022, next year, do you think it will be met?
And so in December of last year, there was a commitment by Treasury to eradicate pit latrine. The commitment was to put out 3.4 billion rands, which was subdivided into, in the first year, 2020 to 21, 700 million, 21 to 22, 800 million, and so forth, and 1.3 million in the last year. All of these commitments are good, and we appreciate it. I think what we call in as Amnesty International, that there should be a roadmap, there should be a concrete roadmap to ensure that pit toilets are eradicated within these 3 years. And as Amnesty International, we commit to hold the states to account. More than that, we have seen consistent failures and quite putting it mildly, of the state not meeting its own deadlines when it comes to norms and standards for education, in terms of providing sanitation, providing basic equipment in schools. And if logic serves us right, there's reason to doubt. But we hope that the department and the state would in many ways fulfill their promise to eradicate pit latrines by 2022.
So apart from your disappointment that the president didn't really say anything regarding sanitation and schools, the report that was released earlier this week talks about government's failure to address the broken education system in the country. Part of what he said during his State of the Nation address yesterday is that every 10-year-old needs to be able to read for a meaning, as we know that we're sitting with grade 2s who are not able to read for a meaning, and mention a number of things like they looking into introducing coding and robotics in grade R to grade 3 in 200 schools, for example. Did you really say enough in terms of responding perhaps to the challenges that were highlighted by the report?
As Amnesty International, I think there is need for greater commitment. And just to understand the background to this, of the 23,471 schools, 72% of those schools have no access to internet. And talking about robotics, in this, 239 of these schools have no electricity at all. And so if you're talking about all of these plans, I think the foundations need to be laid. And if the foundations are not laid, I think this is just a wish list, if you ask me.
All right, so he needs to address the basics before coming into issues such as robotics. That's what you say. I
think foundationally, when we say the system is broken and unequal, it's literally broken, with infrastructure falling apart, with learners having to study in very unconducive environments, and unequal. The inequality in the system is quite rife, if you ask me. If you compare by province, if you compare in province, if you compare by public and private education, the inequality is really, really vast. And I think the foundations need to be laid for us to start talking about progressing learners into the use of robotics and coding. Numeracy and literacy is still a challenge in South Africa. Many learners cannot read for meaning. Many readers cannot do simple arithmetics and calculation. And these are foundations, if you ask me, for coding. And that needs to be addressed.
All right, I'm afraid time constraints. We have to leave it at this, but thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Samson Ogunyemi is economic, social, cultural rights researcher and campaigner from Amnesty International South Africa, giving their reaction to President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address, putting that sharp focus really on matters of education. We stay with this theme now.